First Contemporary Read session today. I'm Kevin Clare, and with me today is Gar McVeigh Russell, who lives in Oakland in the US and had his novel Sin Against the Race listed in the Advocate's Best Books to Read in 2018. Now, talk us about how you found that out and what happened.
Well, it was one of those things. I woke up, went on the Facebook like one usually does when one wakes up, or shouldn't do, but I started seeing congratulations from people, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And then I found it that I had gotten this honor from the Advocate as the best novel they read for one of the best novels they read for 2018. And I hurriedly threw on some sweatpants, ran outside where my husband was, and showed him on my iPad, look. And he took a picture of me, which I'm sorry I haven't been able to dig up, but he took a picture of me standing in front of the house with the iPad showing the display.
How did you celebrate?
Oh, I think we went out to dinner at our favorite Indian restaurants in Berkeley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gar. We also have Liz Fuhrer, if I've got that correct, because I was asking you about the pronunciation during the week. Liz has been a soldier, a bartender, a shoe salesperson, an assistant museum curator, and even a driving instructor. Liz, what is it like to be a soldier? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. For me, it was a very challenging time. It very much pushed every single boundary that I had, physically, mentally, all of that. I will say that it led to me having a lot of energy when I was done to put that down onto paper and write about that experience. And I did include that time of my life in several of my novels.
Fantastic. We also have with us today, here in Sydney, like I am, Nigel Bartlett. Nigel will be reading from his thriller, King of the Road. Talk us about how you came up with the main character's name. First off, what is his name?
Right, okay. The book is good, like that. And the main character's name is David Kingsgrove. And the name came about, I was waiting for the bus one day home from work, and all I knew was this character was called David. And there was buses were going past that weren't my bus, and I saw this one going past that was number 343 to Kingsgrove. And I saw this word and I thought, Kingsgrove, that's like a really solid name for my character. And I mulled it over and I just gave him the name Kingsgrove. And it turned out that during the writing process that actually had a lot of follow-on effects, because it gave rise to a little scene where he remembers his childhood, where the boys called him, because he was gay, they called him Queensgrove, and then they started calling him Queenie and took the mick out of him for being gay. And that's just a nice little scene that wouldn't have come around if I hadn't seen that bus. And then halfway through the book, David Kingsgrove, this sort of nice middle-class character, transforms himself into this Aussie outback vigilante guy who's called Davo, King of the Road. And that came out as well just from seeing that bus that one day. And I had been just struggling with the surname for him, and I just really saw this bus and I thought, oh, that will make a good name. And then it turned out to have a whole load of follow-on effects, including the title of the book, which was great. So.
Oh yeah. But inspiration comes from anywhere. It's better than looking at a surname list online or something like that. We also have Valentine Wheeler, whose life ambition is to eat food of every country. Your mic's muted for the moment. Is there any food we should try, Valentine?
Well, I live in a Brazilian neighborhood. My whole city is probably about 40% Brazilian, so I eat a massive amount of Brazilian food. And we have, since we moved here, become completely fixated on these little fried chicken pastries It's this little shredded lump of chicken in the middle with spicy sauce, and then it's wrapped in dough and deep fried, and it's called a cochina. And yes, if you're ever in a Brazilian neighborhood, it is not to be missed. Plus anything made of bread, just anything made of bread.
I totally understand that. And Valentine, like me, has a hate of Vegemite. I'm Australian. I don't understand why anyone would ever create Vegemite. What are your ideas on Vegemite, Nigel? Love or hate?
I love Vegemite.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's get started. I want to remind people who are watching on the stream that if you want to ask our readers today any questions, please put it in the comments section of this live YouTube stream. Look, we're going to start with Gar today. Gar, what will you be reading from? And you can turn off your OBS.
I will be reading from my novel, Sin Against the Race.
Fantastic.
Should I get going?
Yes.
So I'm just reading from the beginning, starting at the beginning of the book. So this is the beginning of the story. Sirens broke Alfonso's sleep, but when he awoke, they'd gone. His mind switched on, he again found himself in the desert of another sleepless night. Disaster stirred in the dimly lit alleys of his mind. Sweat sopped his forehead. Closed eyes longed for sleep. Weariness eventually drifted him into what his cousin Carlton described as a halfway to dawn state, neither dark nor light, neither asleep nor awake. He wanted to linger in that state for as long as possible and cocoon himself in its ambiguities. Halfway to dawn is a Billy Strayhorn expression, Carlton explained. Alfonso wasn't familiar with the jazz legend. Who was Billy Strayhorn? He asked. His cousin scowled and said, "You better get an education, young man." That night, they listened to Lush Life, Chelsea Bridge, and other wonders. Carlton often visited him halfway to dawn. All of their moments, tender, sweet, sublime, catty, silly, confounding, fierce, coalesced into one. None overpowered the other. A blues requiem whose stanzas were a work in progress. When dawn proper began announcing its presence through his bedroom window, Alfonso denied it by placing his pillow over his head. Then his iPhone vibrated on the nightstand. He fought the urge to reach for it. Halfway to dawn needed to last just a little bit longer. Moments later, a different sound jostled him. He recognized the heavy footsteps as either his father's or his sister Belinda's. Before he could decipher which, he heard his father's voice outside his bedroom door at the top of the stairs. No, that's all right. What's going on? No, really? Seriously? It's burning all the way down? Oh, man. No, you didn't call me too early. You made my day, my friend. You made my day. His father descended the stairs. The words became fainter. His iPhone buzzed again. He couldn't ignore it a second time, not with his father also up and excited about something. He grabbed it off the nightstand. The time flashed 6 a.m. 2 text messages from the local news station jerked him upright. Holy shit, his dry voice croaked. Alfonso hurriedly dressed and stuffed what he needed for the day into his backpack, though the first day of classes was the last thing on his mind. He made a point of rushing past his father's study on his way out the front door so that his passage would go unnoticed. Did my dad really say you made my day? He descended the hill on Beacon Street where his family lived and wound his way from Peel to 44th to Stevens until he reached the northeast corner of Huckleberry Park at Stevens and 45th. A brisk walk west down 45th brought him to the park's stone gateway at Carver Street. He paused, then entered. Trees lined the path as the grade descended. It eventually leveled out, emptying into a large grassy field. And not too long ago, he and his father rushed furtively out of the house together and came to this grassy field to play baseball. The early hours of a steamy summer morning required that they do nothing less. They snuck out to avoid his mother's disapproving stare. She hated that they played with a hardball, even if Alfonso wore protective gear. "Take the softball," she'd say, if she caught them leaving. They did, but only for show. During game time, they always kept the ball small, round, tightly wound, regulation down to the last stitch. Walking through the middle of the field, he could picture his father's tall, imposing figure clad in black shorts and a gray tank top, striking a familiar pose. Body in profile, head turned towards his objective, the ball clasped close to his chest. Alfonso, in deep concentration, held his bat at the ready. When his father played in college, they called him the Wizard because he made balls disappear. No one saw them as they whizzed by. The years had changed nothing. His father still had a mean fastball. Whenever Alfonso connected, they set their sights skyward, following the ball like Charlie Brown followed his kite, with hope that they'd be able to track it and retrieve it so that they could send it soaring again. What if someone got hurt? Would he say, "You made my day" then? He veered right, trudged across the damp grass towards his destination. I think I have a little more time. Over the summer, the Huckleberry Community Clinic had become a living memorial, a place of homage. He went by it nightly after they closed for the day to glimpse at what his cousin had helped to bring into the world. During each visit, he stared at the founder's photos that hung just inside the door, taken on opening day. They stood in front of their new space, faces beaming brighter than the sunlight that struck them. And at the far end of the group, sitting down with a reserved smile on his gaunt face, was Carlton. Alfonso didn't attend the opening ceremony, but his cousin didn't give him grief about it. "I'm still taking your ass down there to get your HIV test." He told Carlton he was looking forward to it. 2 months later, Carlton was dead.
Wow. Very strong piece. I love early in that piece you were talking about that state of you're not asleep, you're awake, and how that I was doing a lot of that last night. how that can sometimes be enjoyable and yeah. But I also wanted to ask you, and you brought up AIDS right at the end of that piece. Sin Against the Race also features activism, and you came out while joining AIDS activist group ACT UP and I remember ACT UP very much throughout the 90s, etc. Share a story from those days for us, Gar.
Oh boy. There was one activist who I recall. I mean, I made a lot of friends in that group and met a lot of incredible, powerful people. There's one activist I remember in particular for her ferocity or her fierceness, and that was Connie Norman. She was a transgender activist, probably the first transgender activist I'd ever met. She was warm, she was friendly, very loving, very giving, and she gave you hell if you did anything to, prevent the work of trying to stop this disease. And I just remember her strong presence at events, speaking, getting arrested and all that. So somebody I look up to this day. She passed quite some time ago, but I think of her fondly.
Lovely, Gar. Thank you very much for that reading. I'm going to go to Liz next. So Liz, unmute yourself. And what will you be reading from today?
I will be reading from Stitches and Sepsis, which is my newest release, just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's book 2 of the Vivian Chastain series. And just for a little bit of context, Vivian is a bartender at a lesbian nightclub in Sacramento, California. She's also a veteran. And I will just jump right in, if I may.
Yes.
walked across Midtown, enjoying the sunshine. Moving my body helped loosen up all of the sore spots from my run-in with Martina. I found the address Buck had given me. The front of the shop had large windows and an awning, little piles of leaves circled in the breeze. A burly man opened the door carrying a push broom and a bucket of water. He held the door open for me. "Thanks, man," I said as I squeezed past him, stepping over a puddle of urine on the stoop. Inside, the shop was an incredibly masculine space, decorated to look like a 1950s greaser-style barbershop. There were black and white pictures of classic cars and motorcycles on the walls, some rusted gas station signs, and old-school leather barber chairs that had ashtrays built into the arms. The place even had a mini fridge with free beer for the customers. There were men cutting hair at the first two chairs, and Buck was standing in the back at the last chair. I rarely saw her out of her security shirt and boots. "Viv, this is Tosh. Tosh, this is Vivian." Buck and Tosh both sized up the fresh gashes on my cheek and temple, but neither said anything about them. Tosh was dressed in denim jeans, white t-shirt, motorcycle boots, and a black leather apron. She was curvy, maybe 35, and had tattoos on her forearms, neck, and hands. Her mousy brown hair was styled in a perfect pomp. Tosh extended her hand and we shook. She gave me a flirtatious grin that carried up into her hazel eyes, displaying some sexy crow's feet at the corners. Heat flushed up my chest. She cleared her throat. "So, you're going short?" "Yeah, it's time. Plus, there was a bit of a situation, and now my hair's a disaster," I said as I pulled off my baseball hat. In unison, Buck and Tosh both said, "Damn," which was followed by riotous laughter. "Dude, you must have really pissed off your girlfriend," Tosh said, still laughing and slapping her hand on her thigh. I bit back my own laughter. "It was an angry woman for sure. Think you can fix it?" "Of course, sit down." Tosh patted the back of her leather barber chair, which I sunk into a bit as I sat. She covered me with one of those haircut capes, snapping it too tight around my neck. She stood back, looking at my face and jawline, and nodded. "I know exactly what will look perfect on you." "Okay, that's all I need to hear." Buck grinned and her eyes shone. "Goodbye, Sporty Dyke. Hello, Butch. You've always been a Butch, you know. Your tips will go up the next few weeks, guaranteed." She grabbed a beer and took a seat along the wall. Tosh cut away large chunks of my hair. I watched as it got shorter and shorter. Before I knew it, she had brought out the clippers. I tensed up a bit, but knew I ought to trust her. She talked me through each stage, telling me that she was using a metal 2-guard on the back and sides, and then a scissor cut on the top. She took her time, checking her work along the way, and she was very careful not to bump the cut on my temple. Finally satisfied, she used her dryer to blow away all of the little itchy bits of hair. Then she used some pomade in my hair and styled it. In the end, I thought I looked sharp and loved the new look. Plus, my head felt so light. The hairstyle really emphasized my jaw and cheekbones. "Dude, look at you," she said as she pulled off the cape and handed me a mirror so I could check the back. Buck gazed up from a magazine and whistled through her front teeth. "Woo! You've always been a hot item at the club, but this takes it to a whole new level. Be ready to work your tail off tonight. Everybody's going to be lining up at your station." I chuckled and waved her off, and then paid Tosh, including a hefty tip. "See you in 2 weeks," she said. I tilted my head at her, not quite understanding. "Now that you've got a shortcut, you'll want to keep it tight. You'll see." I took my time on the walk back to my studio, feeling the chilly breeze on my freshly shorn scalp. I stopped off at a bodega to get some essentials and paused to smell some early white roses growing along a fence, a habit I had picked up from Ange. Back at my studio, I put away the groceries and thought about calling Kate, but didn't. Instead, I spent the afternoon sitting on my futon in the sunshine, reading the end of The Birth of Venus and enjoying the quiet calm of my home. Every time a thought about Jared, Martina, my family, or Ange popped into my head, I acknowledged it and then pushed it away. It was a challenge, and the thoughts kept cycling through, but I wanted some fucking peace for once. Work that night was hectic, and Buck was right. The barber cut drew a lot of attention. My customers loudly professed how good I looked. As expected, I got a lot of questions about the gashes and homemade stitches on my cheekbone and temple. I managed to give a lot of snarky non-answers because the truth behind the haircut and gashes was certainly not up for discussion. I didn't get home from work until after 4. The bandages on my knuckles were soaked with a variety of bar fluids, which were not conducive to healing. I took my time cleaning the wounds, checking for infection, and applying fresh antibiotic ointment and bandages before going to bed. I turned the ringer off on my cell phone because it felt like a good boundary for myself that night. A nice, long, uninterrupted sleep was what I wanted, but it wasn't in the cards for me.
A beautiful piece. Yeah, that was beautiful. You mentioned this is part of the Vivian how do I pronounce it? Chastain series of books that contains scenes in a lesbian nightclub based on your own bartending experience early this century. Can you share one of those stories with us?
Oh, so many. I mean, a very, very busy lesbian nightclub. It was always crammed with people. The walls literally sweat because there were so many people dancing, just crowded in there, which is so bizarre now thinking about, in quarantine times. But sex, people doing all kinds of things in the alley.
Any particular thing you remember? Any particular story that was just so out there? What was the one time you were working there and you thought, or the first time you went, oh no, seriously not, that's not happening?
So we did have what we called Coyote Ugly Night, which is where the manager, she would get up on the bar and walk all the way down and pour Everclear or some other really high proof alcohol down the bar. And then we'd set the bar on fire, very much like they did in the movie. And that was always an exciting time. And of course, the first time was the most like, oh, I can't believe we just set the bar on fire.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Liz. We're going to go to Valentine Wheeler next. Valentine, what are you going to read from today?
I'm going to be reading from my upcoming release, which is coming out next month. It's a short 99 cents latest release in my Swanley series. It's called Piece of Cake, and I don't have a physical copy, but let me see if I can make my
go back. Oh yeah.
No, my phone's just too powerful for
no,
this.
That's right. Go for it. Read it to us.
But it is I have a novel, a novella, and then this short piece coming out. And this is, I can show you the first book in the series. This is the first book in the series, No Parking. And that came out a couple of years ago. But this is a story about a widower who his kids have forced him to go out and join a class at the rec center because they're worried that he has no friends because he does have no friends.
Okay, go for it.
This is from Piece of Cake. Alan locked the door of the rec center behind them as Richard watched, already feeling a little tipsy. He leaned against Richard's car, looking up at the stars peeking out from between the clouds as Richard tucked the Tupperware of cake into the passenger seat. Couldn't believe how good it had turned out. And he'd maybe jumped at Alan's offer of a container a little aggressively, but he'd made a whole cake, all by himself. Alan had helped, had guided him, shown him how to whisk the eggs and handed him the ingredients, warm fingers brushing Richard's as he read the recipe, but all the actual work, that had been Richard. And he refused to be embarrassed by how proud he was of the little cake as he closed the car door. Alan fell into step beside him, hands in his jacket pockets. The walk to downtown Swanley was quick, burning off some of the sugar from their baking project, and Richard tried to take it slower than he would have back when he carried mail down the street, tried to savor the crisp air. When was the last time he walked around like this rather than drove? He couldn't remember. Alan led Richard down the bar's steps to a sunken patio filled with kids at least 3 decades younger than either one of them. I like this place, he said a little sheepishly. Reminds me of being 25. The bar was quiet, despite the students all around them, and they found a table along the edge of the patio, ordered beers from a woman with a septum piercing and a bouquet of flowers tattooed on her bicep. Did you go to school around here? Asked Richard to fill the silence as she walked away. The air seemed suddenly tense and awkward now that they were seated, just the two of them across a tiny table stenciled with blue-green swirls. Richard tried to recall the last time he'd sat with someone at a restaurant, someone other than his children. God, he really had turned into a hermit, hadn't he? Alan shook his head. No, I'm from Detroit originally. Went to college in the Upper Peninsula, but I got tired of the cold. Giving your date your jacket stops being a smooth move when you end up with frostbite one too many times. So, what, you moved to Massachusetts for our famous tropical weather? Richard shook his head. Doesn't really sound like an improvement. Alan shrugged, smiling. Actually, I spent some time in Germany first. Massachusetts is paradise compared to the UP, and it's less terrifying than the Black Forest. I'm almost afraid to ask what that means, Richard said. Hey, I got lost in the woods trying to get to a watchmaker's shop once, and when it gets dark there, everything starts to look like Hansel and Gretel. Alan shuddered visibly, dramatically. At least here in Massachusetts, I'm not worried about a witch's oven. Don't go to Salem in October then, said Richard, laughing and nodding his thanks as the waitress set his beer down in front of him. The beers were just the right temperature, light and fresh, with moisture beating down the sides to gather in wet rings on the smooth wood. What were you doing in Germany? Richard asked, leaning forward, feeling a little giddy. Maybe being in a bar after 9 o'clock was getting to him, making him act like a kid, but he was having more fun than he'd had in years. Plus, Alan's stories were great, a glimpse into worlds he had no context for. Richard hadn't ever left the country. He and Caroline had planned to go to Niagara Falls someday, but then, well, they'd never made it, was the bottom line. He swallowed down the sudden, sharp memory of Caroline and kept his eyes on Alan, on the twinkle in his eye, and the way he leaned forward over the table, focused entirely on Richard. Working for a theater company, said Alan. I sort of fell into it after a bad breakup. Crossing an ocean seemed like a good way to never run into my ex again. Did it work? Alan laughed, took a long sip of his beer. Well, I did run into them in Barcelona 3 years later, so not really. The conversation turned easy after that, and Richard's second beer went down just as easy as the conversation, sipped between bouts of laughter and stories about his kids and growing up in Swanley, and Alan's stories of prima donnas and over-invested audiences around the world. When Alan finally looked down at his watch and said, "Oh, geez, it's getting late," Richard didn't want the night to end. The bartender waved goodbye to them as they climbed the steps back to the street, and Alan waved back. I can't believe you've lived here this long and we've never met, said Richard, or at least run into each other at the bakery or something. It's not a big town. Maybe we did. You just didn't realize it, said Alan. Richard smiled. I think I delivered to every house at least once before I retired. Knew almost everyone, at least the folks who were home when their mail arrived. Their shoulders bumped companionably on the narrow sidewalk. But I never met you. I'd remember. You're hard to forget. Alan smiled, ducking his head. His hair had started to escape its styling in the back, a few curls popping up in the light breeze. Richard had the sudden urge to reach out and touch them, but he stuck his hands in his pockets instead. You probably delivered my mail too then. You just didn't know it was me. I'm running back and forth to the rec center and the theater most days. He elbowed Richard. His arm was warm, and Richard leaned into it a little, curling his hands in his pockets, wishing he'd brought a jacket or something to guard against the late spring chill. I guess you didn't spend much time at the bars either. Richard was quiet, thinking about his lonely life. It hadn't seemed that way a month ago, but now... I don't get out much, he said finally. Well, I'm glad I could help, said Alan, as they turned the corner into the rec center lot. Richard stopped by his car. Thanks for this, he said, hand on the door. Really, for the tutoring and for the beer. Alan darted in and kissed his cheek. Thanks for coming. Then he climbed into his own car. I'll see you at class, he said through the open window as he pulled out of his spot. Richard stood for a moment, his stomach warm from beer and companionship, staring after Alan's taillights as they faded, frozen in place. Must have been all that time he spent in Europe, he thought, his cheek tingling. He raised his hand to his face, finger brushing against it as if to keep the feeling a moment longer.
Lovely. Very nice. Valentine, mentioned to me that you base a lot of your characters on customers and co-workers where you work in the post office. Tell us about, a character or some characters, real or imagined.
Well, so I have worked in the post office for 7 years, and the thing about the post office is that everyone has to go there. Like everyone. Any other retail, you get a subsection of the population, No, you get everybody at the post office. So most of the names in my books I have stolen from customers just wholesale. Most of the weird quirks in some of my characters it's all people that I have had to deal with.
Tell us about one of those quirks. Go on, just one.
Sure. Oh, I have so many.
Two then.
Last office, we had a customer who we referred to as Mr. Suspicious, because he would come in a trench coat, a fedora with a feather in it, and he would buy $4,000 in money orders once a week, and then he would mail them just with a stamp on them somewhere different every week. And every week, now this was the weird part, every week he would make a joke about, boy, doesn't this seem suspicious? And we were like, yes, it certainly does. Would you like to expand on that? And he never did. And I have wondered, and then he disappeared. So I have wondered about him for years. So he appears in a few of my novels in the background, because I worry about suspicious man sometimes. I hope he's okay, but I worry about him.
Yeah, my very first job, I actually dealt with the public, and where I was working, it was there was no socio-economic middle ground. It was either well off or poor, and some of the people, the stories I could tell about some of those people, but that's not what we're here to do. Thank you very much, Valentine. It's time for Nigel to read from King of the Road.
Hi, yes. So King of the Road, my first book published in 2015. As I was saying in a previous panel, it started off as a sort of family drama and then turned into a crime drama. And it's the story of a 35-year-old gay man, lives on his own in Sydney. Pretty regular gay guy. His main struggle is he struggles with internal homophobia. He doesn't love being gay, and he looks after his 11-year-old nephew once a month. Partly his parents like to have a break from the kid, and it also gives them some bonding time. And in the very opening chapter, David, the main character, goes to his computer one day and finds some very unsavory images on his computer. He doesn't know how they've got there. He's very shocked to see them. They're pretty horrific. And on the same day, Andrew is staying with him, and Andrew disappears. So it's a story of a missing child. And in the chapter that I'm about to read, which is chapter 3, David's just come back from seeing his family just after the boy has gone missing, and they all hate him. The family have turned against him, blame him for the boy going missing. This is a scene where things start to get worse for David. The book does deal with some difficult themes, but I've tried to just touch on them without going into any detail during the book. I'll start reading. Chapter 3. What have you heard? Have you found Andrew? Those are always going to be my first questions whenever I see Detective Sergeant Greenwood. I'm afraid not, he replies, standing in my doorway. Nothing as yet. I press my hands to my face and slump against the doorframe. Are you all right, Mr. Kingsgrove? I wipe my eyes and stand up straight. I've been on my sofa, wallowing in my own misery. Andrew's gone, the family's turned against me, and it's all my fault. Sorry, I say. Greenwood stares at me while I rub my face and compose myself. Behind him are Detective Constable Fard and 2 uniformed officers, a woman and a man. This is Constable Clunes and Constable Hatcher, says Greenwood, introducing me to the latest members of the police to have turned up on my doorstep since last night. The woman nods, the guy just stares from behind petrol station sunnies. They're both wearing standard issue baseball caps, the checkered line wrapping their skulls like crime scene tape. Police head, do not enter. Mind if we take a look around the place, says Greenwood. Which place? My brain's not working. This place, just to see if there's anything here that might help us find Andrew. I'm in a daze, but I stand back to let them into the flat. Is it okay for me to stay? I don't even know my own rights in my own home. Yes, we'd like you to stay, says Greenwood. 3 of them troop into the flat, Greenwood, Fard and Clunes, and Hatcher for some reason remains outside. I'm not sure what to do, so I decide to sit on the sofa and keep out of the way. I pick up yesterday's Good Weekend. It's a bumper issue, even more not to read than usual. I chuck it aside so I can sit down and look up to see all 3 of them putting on rubber gloves. Greenwood is staring at me. Oh, are you waiting for me? I ask. It seems he is, so I stand and join him near the bookcase, while Clunes retreats to a position near the door. Fard starts handling my possessions as if they're potential treasures I brought along to Antiques Roadshow. He runs his eye along my bookcase, pulling out a title every so often, fanning it open gently, reading the back cover, becoming so absorbed in 1 or 2 that I think he's about to ask if he can borrow them. He replaces all the Armistead Morpins as he found them, until he gets to The Night Listener, which he lingers over before putting it back but leaving it sticking out a couple of centimetres. He has no problem with most of the Nick Hornbys, but he does the same with About a Boy, and another book called New Boy. I can't remember who it's by, and I strain to see the author's name as Fard is peering at its blurb. From what I remember, it was some young adult book about a teenager trying to settle into a different school. It can't have been all that great, but he seems quite taken by it. He's unperturbed by the row upon row of other paperbacks. But when he comes to the art and design titles on the bottom shelf, he pauses at one whose spine I can't make out, and, using just the tip of his finger, he pulls it out. It's by Germaine Greer, The Beautiful Boy. Even I can recognize the pattern he's drawing in his mind. He's not looking for information about Andrew at all. He's looking for clues about me. That was a present, I say quickly. Who from? Says Greenwood. Fard hands him the book. Cam and Vicky, Andrew's parents, funnily enough. I feel a surge of relief as I remember this. Had you asked for it? No, they were using their imaginations. Ah, right. He raises his eyebrows and nods as he leafs through the pictures of semi-naked adolescents. They must have thought you'd like it. Good, is it? I don't know, I've not read it. It's the truth, but it sounds unconvincing. That was one of those unwanted gifts you pretend to be delighted by. I don't blame him for thinking it's an odd choice. I'd thought the same when I unwrapped it myself. Greenwood hands it back to Fard, who replaces it on the shelf. Again, he leaves it sticking out a couple of centimetres. Sorry about the dust, I say. I haven't cleaned for a while. I've seen a lot worse, says Fard. He stands back from the shelves and his boss takes his place in the search, moving on to my entertainment unit. I notice Greenwood's navy suit has a sheen to the elbows as he bends to open the long, low drawer beneath the TV and assorted machines. I do a quick mental scan of what he might find. I'm not a big movie collector. He lifts out a Derek Jarman film, Caravaggio, with a bare-shouldered lad on the cover. He's not a kid, I say. Greenwood looks at the picture, at the boy's smooth cheeks and hairless chest, and then passes it to Fard. How old do you reckon? I look at the cover over Fard's shoulder. 20, I say. Maybe 25? Nah, says Fard. More like 15, 14 even. He hands me the box. I can see how he'd think that. The actor, Dexter Fletcher, looks impossibly young. It's a classic film, I say. I'm sure it is, says Greenwood. But then again, so's Lolita. I frown. Greenwood takes back the DVD. I try to remember its plotline so I can counter his argument. It's been years since I've watched it. He's already moved on, though. You haven't got a boyfriend at the moment, is that right? Fard asks. That's right. Had one recently? Not for a couple of years. Why is that, then? Because I go out with losers and fuckwits. because I don't like the guys who like me, because I don't fancy gay men, which is a problem when you're a gay man. That's just how it's worked out, I reply. Greenwood makes a sound that's something between a throat clearing and a humph, and he stands up. Nothing more to see in my DVD drawer, apparently. Excuse me, but how is this all relevant, I ask. Even daring to question the police increases my anxiety. Mr. Kingsgrove, says Greenwood, looking around the room. I feel a lecture coming on. His eyes are light on me. You called us to report your nephew missing. You would, I assume, like us to find him, correct? Correct. To do that, we need to investigate every possibility, unpleasant as that may be for you. I can assure you it's in the best interest of your nephew. I feel suitably admonished. Far be it from me to protest. I let the matter drop. Let's go through to the other room, says Greenwood. I follow him and Fard into the kitchen, Clunes trailing behind me. Fard stands by the fridge. Even in his suit, it's easy to tell he keeps himself in shape and is proud of it. His arms are splayed, as if he's posing for a 50s physique mag, but somehow it seems the most natural in the way in the world for him to stand. What have we got here, he says. His accent is thick with the colours of the western suburbs. He taps with his pen on the pictures I've ripped out of magazines and stuck to my fridge with real estate and plumbing magnets. Greenwood looks forward to look at one picture. It's of two boys in leather jackets and caps, their arms around each other's shoulders. They can't be older than 10 or 11, and they look like cherubic Hell's Angels. That's a Bruce Weber photo, I tell them. Greenwood looks at me blankly. Fard continues tapping it with his pen. He's famous, I say. Greenwood shakes his head as if to say, haven't a clue what you're talking about. Look, it's not porn and it's not perverted, I tell him. So what is it then, says Fard, turning his gaze towards me. As his eyes meet mine, my anxiety spikes. Well, it's art, I guess. I feel like the dweeb at school trying to explain my favourite author to the footy team. And why has he dressed them up like that? It's a comment. Now they're both staring at me as if I'm talking Swahili. On rebellion? Fard returns to the picture. Seems weird to me. Of course, I say. Art is weird. That's it.
I forgot how powerful your novel is because I did read it quite a few years ago and just reliving that chapter myself. I'm going to ask you something that's going to take us to a much lighter note after a very, heavy police interrogation. The book, your current work in progress, features bodybuilding and method research, which includes a lot of nudity. Do you want to tell us about the method research for that book?
Yeah, so it wasn't. So a couple of years ago, maybe about 3 years ago now, I took part in. I decided to take part in bodybuilding competitions, even though I was by that stage over 50, and it wasn't directly meant to be research for the book. I did it because I wanted to do it, but it turned into research from the book, and brilliant research because otherwise, I would have had to go off and interview lots of people about what's it like and what's it like backstage and what's it like being on the diet and da 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 da. But I did it all myself. I really loved it, and it was really fantastic. But yes, one of the things I had to get used to was this idea of wearing tiny little, minuscule, posing trunks on stage. But then also when you go and get your spray tan done the night before. If they have people to do it for you, and I phoned them up and I said, what do you need me to wear? And she said, well, you can either put a sock over it, just go nude if you want. Just go nude. It's up to you. And I was like, okay. So I turned up, but I had brought a sock and placed it over it. And then the second, I took part in 3 competitions, and the second one I was just like, oh, who cares? I just went completely naked. So I had these 2 women. Totally, it was actually very good for my self-consciousness because I just, they didn't care. They'd seen it all before, and I didn't care because I'm a gay man with 2 women. I'm not gonna. And it was just one of those moments where you kind of think this is very surreal. And if I ever told my 90-year-old mother about it, she'd be completely.
Thanks, Nigel. Look, I'm going to round this off, and I want to thank you all for reading today. But before we go, one by one, I want you to tell our audience how they find you on social media. So we'll start in the order we read. Gar, turn on your microphone and let us know how people can find you.
I am on Twitter at the _gar_spot. I have a blog of the same name called The Gar Spot at thegarspot.com, and I am on Facebook as Gar McVeigh Russell.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, Liz, turn on your microphone. How do people find you?
I have a website. It's lizfarame.com. I'm on Facebook under Liz Farame. I'm also on Twitter, although I'm still trying to figure that one out. And I have a tiny little YouTube channel with some of my other readings on it, also under Liz Farame.
Fantastic. Valentine, microphone on. Where can people find you? Oh, your microphone.
Thought I hit it. You can find me on Twitter at Ghostal Service. That's GHOST.
A play on postal service, or is there a ghost element? Yeah.
No, because every time something goes wrong, we blame it on the Ghostal Service. And then you can find me on my website, which is valentinewheeler.com. And you can also find me at Wizards in Space Mag for the literary magazine that I'm on the masthead for.
Fantastic. Thank you, Valentine. Nigel, your turn. Microphone on. Where can people find more about you?
The easiest way is on Instagram. I'm Nigel Writer on Instagram, so it's Nigel Writer. I do also have a website called nigelbartlett.com.au, which so it's important to remember the AU. But Nigel Writer is the easiest way on Instagram.
Yeah, I actually really do like your website. It's one of my favorite author websites. Okay, so thank you everyone for reading today. Thank you for watching, even if you're watching it live or watching it later. We're gearing up for the closing session of Icarus, which I'm getting ready for. Thank you so much for being here. And if you want to keep the discussion going, for those who've got, the secret backdoor key to our Discord chat, that's our sort of official green room area. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for being part of Icarus, everyone. See ya.
Everyone, cheers.
Thank you. Bye.